To have a spatial audio simulation, what is called binaural audio, is by using this, what is called a head and torso simulation. So this has two microphones, one in each ear. And what you do, you record in a room that has no echo, you record the impulse response at different locations, and then you listen to the sound delivered to your ears, hoping that you match the anatomy of this mannequin. So this is a very general mannequin. So now, in Denmark, we have two colleagues that are both called Jesper, and they look like this mannequin. So maybe for them, this simulation works. But they are not here, so I can make it possible. Actually, that one is the one that works at the conservatory, that is the tone master, and the other one works in the Jabra, another company that works with special sound. And 80% of the people in Denmark are called Jespers. But we don't all look like Jesper, so we are all very different, right? So, and also our ears are very different. So do these simulations that are recorded through the dummy head, do they work for everybody? Do they work for people that don't look like the traditional Jesper? So, how many of you know what is an HRTF? More or less, yeah, a little bit more than half. Just for those that don't know, what the HRTF is, in quick terms, is also what is called the acoustic fingerprint. It is it's an abbreviation of what is called head-related transfer function, which means that when you have a sound, before reaching your brain, it will reach the two ears, and the ears act like a filter. So depending on the shape of your ear, but also the shape of your head and the shape of your body, the way you will perceive where the sound is coming from will differ. And so this is what is called, this is what is used in every binaural simulation. So in simulation with headphones, when you want to reproduce where the sound is, you use this HRTF. So again, you can simulate it with that mannequin, but you will have one that is the same for everybody. Agnieszka Rodzinska and Paul Geluso, they had a book in 2017. Now they are working on a new edition, actually. But they have this very nice schematic where they discuss the trade-off between having a very complex calculation of this head-related transfer function. So the most complex one would be when it is individually measured. What does it mean? That you need to go to a laboratory where they have the equipment to measure it, and then they will make your own. So as you can imagine, that's very complex, but it's also very accurate. And the worst case, the lowest one, is the one I was showing you with the head and torso simulator. So the mannequin is very easy because there exists a lot, and it has also low complexity. So, do we need this personalized one in virtual reality? So this is actually a question that doesn't have a yes or no answer, because there has been, and there is still so many people studying this, it is an open topic, and it really depends a lot on the context of use. So usually when they test it in virtual reality, it's mostly these male engineers that they do shooting games. And in shooting games, many times you need it because you have to be very accurate, fast and efficient, and very precise. So for tasks where time and precision is an issue, then probably there are studies that show that you perform much better, not much better, but significantly better with a personalized one. But in other situations, where you don't need a precise, you need a sense of space, but you don't need it super precise. And also you have to think about that when you are in an immersive environment, where you also have images and you're moving, then there are other senses that become dominant. So we are better in sense of space with our eyes than with our ears. So if you see an object, even if its auditory image is not really precise, what happens is that the sound, the image will capture the sound, which means that not always we need this personalized, which is a good thing when you want to have a lower complexity. So just to use some general ones. But it's not a yes or no answer, do we need it? So I will show you now 3 contests in which we have been using virtual environments for individuals which have those different abilities, hearing abilities that I showed you before. So in the context of testing hearing abilities, training, and awareness of hearing abilities. So let's start with the testing. How many of you have taken a hearing test? A lot. For those of you who never did it, or also for you who did it, they are pretty boring, right? You sit in a booth and you listen to this. So you listen to sounds that are like this, at different frequencies, and you need to click when you hear the sounds. So they play different frequencies, different amplitudes, and then they give you what is called the audiogram. So it has been shown that the audiogram doesn't really reflect completely your hearing abilities. So there are people that maybe they do fine in the hearing test, but then you go in the real world, and the real world, luckily, is not just sitting in a booth and listening to clicks. So there are so many things happening. The classic problem of what is called the cocktail party, where people have really difficulties listening to voice. The cocktail parties were actually when you hear many voices, and then you hear, for example, your name, and then your attention is triggered. But there are situations, especially when you have some hearing disabilities, when you are with multiple voices, that you are not really able, or in a restaurant with bad acoustics, you're not really able to concentrate on a specific voice. And maybe you did fine in the audiogram, but then you say to your doctor, oh, but I cannot really function in real life. And this is where actually virtual reality could be useful, because you can simulate a scenario like a restaurant, so you don't have only these warble tones, you have actually simulated real conversations, you can simulate the acoustics of the restaurant, and also the visuals. So you can test. There are not established protocols yet on how to do it properly. But it's getting more and more into research environments, how to create novel testing methodologies using virtual reality. And training. So once you realize that you have some issues, it's possible actually to train and improve. So this is something that we did until last year with a project together with the hospital. This project is called Listen Again, and the project is about helping, in this case, adolescents in Denmark. They get, if they have hearing issues, they get tested very young, and they get a cochlear implant or an hearing aid from very young. So this means that they perform well in real life. But they have issues in these situations, like I mentioned before, the restaurant, or maybe for them, or the playground, or being with many friends. There's still a problem to localize where things are happening. So we're still collaborating with what is called the Copenhagen Hearing and Balance Center, where they are very interested in introducing novel technologies in the clinic, which is very nice for us because with them we develop the technologies and then we test, in this case, with the adolescents. And discussing with these adolescents, their main problem is sound localization. So sound localization, it means obviously that they don't know who is speaking, they don't know where the sound is coming from, so they can perform okay, they can hear, but they lose, for example, the jokes, they lose all the social aspect of being with other children. And together with them, we also investigated what are the situations in everyday life where they have the most difficulties. They said it is when they are in a situation like this, they're fine. When there is only one person speaking, it's they can listen or they can hear. And maybe they don't listen. But in a situation like a playground, there they have too many things going on, and they could use some help. And also when they go outside on a tour to a museum, for example, there also they have difficulties. So what we did, we created some simulations precisely of these two environments, the Music Museum in Copenhagen and a playground. So we created this simulation, and then we asked them here, they came to our lab, they got each, so there were 20 children, they got a device, each they took it home, and they were asked to train for 2 months at home. And then we wanted to measure if they get better in these spatial abilities. So this is another situation where do we need a very precise sonic simulation? So in the project there was also an acoustic engineer who wanted us to simulate the response of every single hearing devices that every single child was wearing. And that would have been a very long task. So in this project, the point was not to have a very, very precise auditory localization, also because each child was listening with a different device, so we didn't take it into account. The main purpose was to give them awareness of where are sounds in space and how does it sound when there are many sound sources. So in that case, they could understand that the way where they place themselves is very important for them to learn to regain an appreciation of a combination of many sounds. So what we did then, yes, so there are these two environments, and we're not very good with graphics, and so it's the cartoon, they were kind of cartoonified. And one is the Music Museum, the other one is the playground. And so they get all this trophy when they do right, when they find, in the Music Museum we created different kind of virtual reality musical instruments that the children, they had to learn their timbre. Because if you have a cochlear implant, you have difficulties, and for those of you who don't know, I didn't know until 3 years ago actually, a cochlear implant is a device when you have a really severe hearing loss, so it is, you get directly implanted instead of, so you bypass the ear basically. So they do well, but they have difficulties in hearing the timbre, understanding the timbre, so recognizing, like say, a flute from a piano. And with our training, maybe I can show you a little bit how it looks like.
Når du har set denne video færdig, så vil du for at dreje til venstre. Hver trofæ kræver, at du klarer forskellige opgaver i spillet. Og opgaverne, de kan ses på de hvide skilte, der hænger ved trofæerne. Men nogle opgaver er dog hemmelige.
No, but this is so let me, I show you some pictures, it's better. So this is what they have to do. On the bottom is the Music Museum. So they have different kind of instruments, and they learn about how the harp sounds like, the piano, and so on. And while in the playground, we created some sort of a musical treasure hunt, where they have to find where all those different, each element has a sound, and they need to find that. Again, because the spatial awareness is what is most difficult for them. So this is, it's a cartoonified version, but it looks exactly like the Danish Music Museum. And at the end of the project, we took all the children to the real music museum. They were very happy to say, oh, I recognize where I trained. So it's not scientific evidence, it's more like anecdotal. But it was nice to see that the children, they made the connection between the virtual and the real museum. So as I mentioned, we had 22 children, and they all had different kind of hearing abilities. And 16 had what is bilateral cochlear implant, so cochlear implant in both sides. And 5, they had hearing aids in both sides, and 1 had in one side one hearing aid, in the other side a cochlear implant. And this graph just shows that what basically is every time they learn something, they get a trophy. So that shows that there is a correlation as expected between, or as hoped, between how many games, trophies they gain and how long they played. But we had several issues. So, well, this we already discussed. Did the spatial sound need to be very precise? Not in this context, but our main issue in this context was that giving them the device to train at home for 3 months was way too long. These games, they were not fun enough at all for them to use it for so long. So they became pretty soon, they became a bit bored. So this is a learning lesson for us to maybe the training should be shorter, or we need to improve in our gamification skills. And so there is a very nice concept actually, how precise do we need to be? And so there is this room divergence effect, which is related to related to plausibility actually. So the question is, how far apart can a visual and an auditory representation be in order for us to make them merge? So to make, let's say, the acoustics of a space, how does it need to sound in order for us to associate to how the space looks like? So this is still a question to be answered. And also, how far apart should two sounds be localized in order for them to be considered as the same object? So we know this ventriloquism effect, that it is when we have a sound source like the one that we use in cinema, for example. We have a person, the lips moving, the speakers are on the side. We make this connection between the lips and the speakers. But does this connection always happen? Obviously not. And in which situation it doesn't happen? I can show you an example where it really didn't happen. And this was a similar application as before. This was also to train a hearing impaired. In this case, it was musicians who had played too much and too loud, and they ruined their ears. And so they couldn't play anymore. They didn't feel, they had this issue of when they hear a band, they cannot recognize, especially if they go to a concert, they could not recognize which instrument was which. Everything was becoming like a big blur. So we created this, in this case we created an augmented reality simulation, because also in our conversations with them, we discovered that they don't like virtual reality, they don't like to be completely isolated. I mean, of course not everybody, but most of them, they liked also to be able to see the real world, keep a connection with the real world. So in this case, in the simulation, we had an image. I can show you in the video how So basically a visual representation of the instrument was matched to the sound. But I don't know how many of you tried the HoloLens. Every time you move it somewhere else, you need to recalibrate. And the calibration was really a nightmare. So many times this connection really was not working, because obviously the image was in place and the corresponding sound was too much dislocated. So this solution ended up being more confusing than useful, unfortunately. So the ventriloquism, what I mentioned before, the ventriloquism effect is important, can help, but it needs some constraints that are not completely understood. So I would like to show you one last example of training, and this is about what we were talking about when you hear too many voices. So this is an application for individuals which have schizophrenia. And there has been developed in the UK something called avatar therapy, where you can simulate their voices, and then if they hear virtual voices, that will learn them cope with this effect of schizophrenia, of hearing voices that are not there. So this, together with Anna, who is a PhD student, supported by the Innovation Fund Denmark, it's like a foundation that supports collaborations between companies and universities. So we are developing a system that allows you to recreate several voices for virtual reality avatar, so then patients with schizophrenia, they can actually cope with these virtual voices. And this now is tested. Of course, we are not doctors, we are not psychiatrists, so we design the tools in collaboration with the stakeholder, and then they are trying now to test the tools, and then we will see if it has an effect or not. Last topic, remember I told you testing, training, awareness. Awareness, how can we help? There is a big discussion now. How can we make people aware that you can damage easily your ears if you go to a concert, if you're in a loud environment, if you're in a noisy situation, and so on. So we are also using in this case a virtual reality simulation where you go inside your ears. So you're basically a small character that navigates inside the elements of the ear. What you learn about how, this is more for school training, you learn the anatomy of the ear, but you also learn that if you are exposed to a very loud sound, in this case, you go from some very nice standing ear cells to some damaged one. So again, it's cartoonified that the all parts of the ear are properly reproduced, and we tested it with with adolescents, and it really helped them increase this awareness that they need to be more careful. This doesn't mean that they will be more careful, who knows, but it's a way to use more interesting technologies that just brochure again and telling you need to take care of your ear, try to make it more engaging for them and interesting. So having said that, there are still challenges, right? We're creating this virtual and augmented and cross-reality environments. So nowadays, we have lots of tools. Companies and research labs, they're providing many tools that can be used both for creating surround sound through headphones, but also with loudspeaker arrays. And also, so in our lab we have this Wakefield synthesis system. But I have to say we don't really use it much because, again, it's not very portable, or it's not portable at all. And also, it doesn't really, it doesn't really fit our purpose, I have to say. So we use it for demonstration, but it's, I wouldn't say that it's useless, but it's not. But again, so this high fidelity, it's missing also, of course, the elevation. It's only a 2D simulation. But this is to say that nowadays, both in terms of hardware and in terms of software, we are getting very far, and we are very far, and the tools are becoming more and more usable. And so they are becoming usable, but still, when we look at, for example, companies versus academia, there is still a challenge. Like, for example, when I was looking at the software from for personalized HRTF, you still find scripts like this, which are fine if you know MATLAB and if you work with software. But these tools are not usable for a person that is more a musician, is more a creative, a person who is more interested on the creative side. There is no point to, nowadays, we could, as researchers, also make better efforts to create more usable tools so they don't stay in our laptop just for ourselves. And also, there is still a lot of research, so Marta, we talk about that, of shared spatial experiences. So how can we create an experience, a musical experience, which makes us feel we are in the same place? I don't think we are there yet. We are getting better, but we're not, and it's not only the acoustics, of course, it's also the sense of touch. There are so many components that make us feel together in a space, which are not the same in network. And this is not only for music, it's also for video conference and so on. I've not seen a system yet that makes me really feel like a connection with the people that are remotely. This is also why we still like in-person meetings, right? Also, I talked about, we have different users. So it is, I talked about the different hearing abilities, but also different age range. So, for example, we are also working with elderly that cannot really exercise. They're in a retirement home. So we are creating this biking simulation so they can see places where they cannot physically go anymore. They can go virtually. But so there are so many diverse needs, also in terms of preference. I mean, some like to train with some kind of music, some like other kind of music, the children also, it's a bit of a stereotype, but the boys, they were asking for a shooting game, but of course we don't want to make a shooting game in the playground. That would be very unethical. But that's what they used to play. So that's what it's fun for them. Microsoft has actually this very nice design toolkit showing all the different elements that we need to take into account if we want to take into account of the different needs of different people, both from the sense of seeing, the sense of hearing, and the sense of touch. So all these VR controllers, most of them assume that you have two arms, but that is not always the case. And we talked about the hearing abilities and so on. There are so many things that one has to take into account. And also what we do a lot is so we like to develop the technologies, but we are not psychiatrists, we're not auditory verbal therapists, and we don't know what the children need. So we talk a lot with the stakeholder and listen to them before doing our design. It is also very hard to measure. So what are we measuring? How can we measure that we succeed? As I mentioned in the Listen Again project, we were measuring their performance, how better they were getting in playing the games. We could have measured their localization ability before and after. We should have done that. But still, there is This is from a book from Soren Beck and Nick Zakharov, where they show the different dimensions of perceptual audio evaluation. So we know very well the physical domain, now we know how to do those measurements, and also perceptual domain, but we still have issues with the affective domain, with the cognitive domain. So issues like presence, immersion, and so on. We have some tools on to measure that, but we don't know perfectly. And also, there was a very nice quote from an article 3 years ago by Claudia and Christopher Rother. The article was called "Can I Trust My Ears in VR?" And what they say is that we don't have really tools to compare the diverse design, the different tools, the different methodology. So still we need some better science, let's say, to understand better what is going on in our ears in VR. So this is to say that we need a combination of skills. So there is the stakeholders, which are diverse population. We need to understand better how to measure the user experience. And then there is the technological side, which is what I was talking about, head-related transfer function, reverberation, and so on. So I think I'm almost done, and I just want to tell you that many of these issues are covered in this open access book that you can read both about the technology and some of the applications. And this is actually the result of a workshop that we have been running for many years at the Virtual Reality Conference. And if you want to participate, it's happening again next March in Saint-Malo, the IEEE Virtual Reality. So if you would like to join us, you're very, very welcome. And I think I'm ready to take some questions.